Hello, this interview is part of a series I'm doing to publicize the 2022 conference of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. The conference is called CyCon, and it'll take place in Vegas from October 20th to the 23rd, just like you can see over my shoulder. Wow, that's getting close. Professor Timothy Caulfield will be giving a presentation at the conference, and I'm happy to be able to speak with him now. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Rob.
So before we begin, let me tell the viewers a bit about you. Timothy Caulfield is a Canada Research Chair. I assume that's the title, Canada Research Chair?
That's right, yeah.
In Health, Law, and Policy. Professor in the Faculty of Law and the School of Public Health, and a research director of the Health Law Institute, all I believe at the University of Alberta. He does research on topics like stem cells, genetics, research ethics, and the public representations of science and public health policy. This has allowed him to publish over 350 academic articles. He's won numerous academic and writing awards, and he's a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences, and the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, who puts on the conference. Caulfield is the author of two bestsellers, The Cure for Everything, Untangling the Twisted Messages about Health, Fitness, and Happiness, and my favorite is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything, When Celebrity Culture and Science Clash. His most recent book is Relax, Dammit, A User's Guide to the Age of Anxiety. So lastly, let me say that Caulfield is the host of an award-winning Netflix documentary series, which I still have to watch, A User's Guide to Cheating Death. Wow, that's fantastic. Did I leave out anything that's important there?
No, that all sounds great. Thank you very much for that nice introduction.
And I'll include that in the written article too. So you have degrees in both science and law. Of all the folks in organized skepticism I've ever met, you're the first in that situation. And I'm confused. Are you a scientist or a lawyer? What's the deal there?
I think I'm confused too, Rob. I really do. I started my career, my academic career, a little, I thought it was going to be a little bit more of a traditional law professor career, but I've always been incredibly passionate about science. So as soon as I finished my graduate work, my first research was in science policy, in health policy, and I never really looked back. And so I rarely think of myself as a law professor. I'm really a health science and health policy professor, and much of my research, if not all of my research now, is extremely interdisciplinary. So I think of myself maybe a little bit more in that science sphere, but with a heavy dose of policy.
Okay, so one more clarification of all that intro stuff I read. So the book, the title is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything. I have a copy, but the subtitle is different from that description, which I got from the CyCon website. So it's not When Celebrity Culture and Science Clash. Mine says How the Famous Sell Us Elixirs of Health, Beauty, and Happiness. What's the deal there with the two titles?
Different jurisdiction, different publishers in different countries went with different subtitles, and in fact, when it was re-released in Canada, they changed the main title to Celebrity Science, I think it was, and then put the Gwyneth one. So and then my latest book, Relax, has a different title in every country, it feels like. So it makes marketing a challenge.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about CyCon, I promise, but I first need to get you to talk about someone that you put on my radar, and I've personally written about because of that. So I first learned of you by being at your CyCon 2018 talk, which I believe was something about pop culture and science, right? And it was at that con that I bought the Gwyneth Paltrow book. So by the way, it's clear that although her name is in the title, the whole book is not about her.
That's right. The book is about the impact of pop culture and spreading misinformation in our perceptions of the world.
But in at least part of it, I do recall, I read it a while ago now, but you tried one of her cleansing diets, if I recall, to see how that affected you.
That's right. I went on one of her detoxes, her cleanses. It was an extreme diet, 3 weeks long, and really extreme, Rob. Like no fooling around here. It was 21 days.
It sounded
almost
horrible.
No solid food.
Anybody would put themselves through that.
No coffee. It almost killed me. I didn't realize what an addict I was until I had to go cold. It's funny because my wife, who's a physician, she goes, you might want to taper before you go. I went cold turkey. and oh my God, it was hard. But yeah, and of course, I wanted to do it because I wanted to experience it, and I both experienced the sort of physiologically and the lack of caffeine. But it was also interesting, and I talk about it in the book, how other people responded to when they realized I was on the cleanse. They saw it as this very noble undertaking, and they were always encouraging, good for you kind of thing. So, which I also thought was fascinating. And the other thing I did was I did a microbiome, before, after. I can't remember exact interval. You think I'd remember this? Like 3 months later, I think it was. Checking my microbiome to see if the promised results materialized in my poop.
So just a few months after, I wrote about her, and it was an article I published in IPT Science named Pepper Potts Supervillain, Gwyneth Paltrow Brings Goop to Netflix, was because they had just announced the Goop Lab series, right? And then I wrote another two. One was specifically about the show after it had premiered, and then another one later for Skeptical Inquirer. So anyway, let's talk about whether or not Gwyneth Paltrow is in fact wrong about everything. Is there anything she's right about?
This is, I'm gonna give a little bit more of a nuanced response than I usually give, because I usually just say no. But look, I'm not going to critique her fashion sense. I think she's got great fashion sense. I'm not going to critique even her acting, which, believe it or not, I don't hate. I know there are some haters out there. I don't hate.
She was great in Shakespeare in Love.
A lot of people are, dump on that show. I think she was great in it. So, and the other reason I'm going to be a little more nuanced is there has been this fascinating evolution on the Goop website, which I still go to, still check to see what's happening. And by the way, yes, it's still filled with mostly bunk, but they're trying to frame it as if they're being more sciencey, and they're trying to frame it as if they're disclosing the lack of evidence. So if they have a bunk article on that Goop website, they'll have, speculative. I can't remember the actual terminology they use. So I find that fascinating. But I think it's still fair to say, when you're talking about health, she's wrong about almost everything. At a minimum, Rob, she puts an inaccurate spin on it. So even when she's talking about healthy lifestyle, getting a good night's sleep, exercising, and eating well, there's always a veneer of pseudoscience associated with it. It can't just be do those three things. It has to be, do it, when the moon is in retrograde. I don't know. There has to be a veneer of pseudoscience. And of course they have to do that, because otherwise, what's the point?
They're going to lose their audience. Yeah. So all right, let's reverse it. What is she most wrong about? So I looked at the website in preparation to talking to you today, just before. So they still sell the jade egg, which they paid $144,000 for that, and other claims are. It's bizarre to me. They, how about coffee enemas, metabolism boosting, detoxifying superpowers? There's special diets called the Prolon. Listen to this one. This got me pissed off. There's a $1,999, a $2,000 Healthline Rainbow mat that looks like, it's like maybe, I don't know, 2 feet by a foot. And this is the description. It's filled with 7 types of natural gemstones, and they list a bunch of them. They warm up with far infrared heat to become a hot stone surface that can help you relax and ease tension in your body. Okay. Hang out on top of the mat, and you'll have the option to bask in pulsed electromagnetic fields and 7 colors of light. Simply lie down on this mat and take a seat for meditation. The rainbow stones are nicely suited for any practice involving your chakras. It's like $2,000. And by the way, it's non-returnable. Says that right in the beginning.
And what a great example. What a great example, because this has become classic in the wellness sphere, where they try to mix, they want to have it all, right? So they try to mix wellness language, right? They try to mix that ancient and exotic, so chakras and this ancient wisdom with sciencey language, right? So you mush it all together. I'm surprised the word quantum wasn't in there, Rob. She loves quantum. She absolutely loves quantum. So, and I actually asked, what's the worst thing that she's most wrong about? And especially for the audience at the CSI event, I think this is really important. She's wrong about the magical thinking. And I'll have some people say, why you dump on her? Her stuff isn't that harmful. Well, first of all, there is stuff that she promotes that is clearly harmful, like colonics, like extreme dieting, like supplements, and who knows what's in them. And also legitimizing and enabling anti-vaxxers and other kinds of voices out there that are really dangerous. But I think sort of globally, what these kinds of individuals, not just Gwyneth, but the wellness community more broadly, is they kind of legitimize magical thinking, right? And I think we saw what happened during the pandemic when you sort of give a pass to magical thinking. And I think sort of long-term and globally, that's the real damage she's doing, right? She's just eroding our ability to think critically. And there's interesting research, as you know, that shows if you believe a little bit of magical thinking, you're more likely to believe more magical thinking.
Yeah, so that book was published in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, quite 7 years or so after Paltrow launched Goop. So Goop was already running for 7 years, and now it's been 7 years since. So Goop's been around 14 years. And in addition to the website, it's now had Netflix behind it with the Goop Lab. By the way, did you watch any of the Goop Lab?
Of course I did. It was absolutely. I wrote a piece on it. I'd be happy to share.
Yeah,
it was incredibly painful.
Send me the link. I'll include it.
It was. It's a big. I called it a pseudoscience infomercial, I think is what and that's one of the things, of course, is infuriating about that is it's really an infomercial for Goop, and trying to legitimize the products. It's an infomercial. Yeah. So yeah, that was. And I will say this, and this is probably where I'm guessing where your question was going. When I used her in the title, you can imagine it was probably 2013 when I made that decision, or to use that, or 2014 almost when I decided to use that in the title. I did not anticipate that she would become such a cultural force in the wellness space, right? So that's interesting. And the other thing I think is interesting is, I haven't said this much in public, but I'm not sure that I would use that title again, because I don't think I'm the right person to be critiquing this, because the critique you often get is that this old white guy should not be telling, the reason that Gwyneth has gotten so much momentum behind her is because the conventional healthcare system has failed women. And I agree with that. I agree with that. And the conventional healthcare system has failed people of color and marginalized communities. I agree with that. But of course, that is no excuse for Goop. And on the contrary, you should be more enraged at Goop because she's exploiting a real problem with the conventional system to sell product and to sell pseudoscience. So you should be more enraged about it. But I'm not sure I was the right voice for that rage. Does that make sense?
That's interesting. I'm not quite sure how race comes into that, though. So do you want to explain a little bit more about why you said that?
Yeah, I think, and I mean this sort of softly. I'm not sure I'm totally sold on my own argument. Have you ever been there? But I think it's good to reflect, right, Rob? It's always good to reflect.
Yeah. Well, the reason I say specifically, if this was if Goop was marketing to disadvantaged communities, I'd agree, but they're not. I mean, you don't have people on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum buying $2,000 mats.
Yeah, and which is another great critique of her argument, right? So people like myself and Jen Gunter and others, the pushback that we have received is that the conventional system is failing these individuals. The conventional system is not listening to these individuals. And yes, they do use the evidence around disadvantaged communities to support their claim, right? But then they exploit that to sell $2,000 crystal,
something like
to say it justifies selling this, which of course is completely absurd. You don't empower people with using misinformation. You don't empower people by legitimizing magical thinking. On the contrary, you disempower them. You empower people with good evidence, good, honest evidence.
Yeah, and I have to say that, the Goop Lab, for people who haven't watched it or checked up on it, it's 6 episodes, if I recall right. And at least 2 of them didn't really have anything to do with Goop products. It was all about promoting paranormal and magical thinking, right? The next to last episode was about energy healing, and I gave a half hour to this chiropractor who was literally lifting people off the table, including Julianne Hough, by his magical interfacing with their quantum energy fields. It was like they looked like they were puppets and he was a puppet master. It blew my mind. And then the last one was the worst episode, in my opinion. Are You Into It? Intuitive, meaning, was a half hour promotion for her own personal psychic medium and the concept of being psychic in the first place, and pushing that, yes, anyone can be psychic. Psychic powers are real. I actually wrote about that. I got a private eye who deals with getting victims of psychic con artists some level of justice as well he can, because it's very difficult to get that in our system, it turns out. And I asked him to watch it, and what did he think about Gwyneth Paltrow, right? I asked about Gwyneth Paltrow's motivations for airing the episode, and does she know she's pushing bullshit? And he said, quote, "I wouldn't presume to know whether or not Gwyneth Paltrow understands the gravity of promoting self-proclaimed psychics, but I fear that this will increase the likelihood of more vulnerable people being defrauded." And that was from the real world scenario of a person dealing with victims of con artists who say they're psychic all the time. So what do you think? Do you think Paltrow believes this stuff, or is she smart about it and says as little as she can so she can do it legally and make as much money as she can?
So I want to comment on the real harm point that you just made, Rob, because I think that's important. I get hate mail every day. I'm sure you get a lot of hate mail too.
Oh, not as much as you do, I'm sure.
And they always, they kind of mock people again, like Jen and me. Oh, why even mention Gwen? This matters. Like, we have good evidence that says, not just Gwyneth, but, Aaron Rodgers and Jessica Alba and Tom Brady. I could go on, Joe Rogan. These people have a real impact. This really does matter. And it's not just frivolous. Plus, all of these things are pop culture moments to talk about the real science, to talk about what you just raised, Rob. So, I don't think we should trivialize this topic. And the fact that it is a pop culture topic is the point. That's the point. Does she believe it? So I've gone back and forth on this. So, I've obviously tried to interview her. And I've got close a couple times, and by that I mean her people said yes, and then they said no, that kind of thing, right? Obviously, someone Googled me, right?
No.
Yeah, exactly. It's not right for Gwyneth. I think that's the response I got. I used to think that she absolutely didn't and was totally cynical. And then I started, there's been a couple pieces on her and I've seen her interview and thought maybe she did kind of believe it. Now I think it's a mashup. I think that, of course, there's a lot of self-denial going on. There was the famous Jimmy Kimmel appearance where she didn't even know what she was selling, or maybe she was joking, but it appears that she didn't know what she was even selling. So that's like pretty cynical. So I think this is about building a huge brand, and there's a lot of mental gymnastics going on so she can sleep at night. So it's a mashup, I think, of just building a brand to sell product and perhaps tricking herself into believing it. But some of it's so absurd, you think that she can't be that foolish, right? She must know this is nonsense.
It's hard. All right. So on the Goop Lab, the chiropractor, I wrote this in my article, so I have the text here, says, you can measure the energy field of the body somewhere 4 to 6 feet off the body. Body doesn't end at the skin. It's multidimensional. So when I'm moving my hands in the air, I'm putting energy into the field around the body. The way we interact with someone without even touching them at the subatomic level changes them in a way. It shapes their form.
It's quantum physics.
Believe this.
Yeah, in my next book, I actually talk about quantum physics. I use it as a really good example of what I call Scienceploitation. We've actually done research on this. It's becoming a very common strategy among the alternative medicine community to talk about stem cells, to talk about genomics, to talk about precision medicine. And they have this weird mashup of, we're going to do genetic testing, which is science, to measure something in order to provide pseudoscience. It's just incredible. And the cognitive dissonance is staggering, that somehow the science is good here, when we're applying it, but when the science critiques what they're providing, oh, you can't use science to study this. So we see that so much in Reiki and almost all the energy healing therapies. And it's unfortunately, we also know it works, Rob. There's interesting research that talks about, the use of sciencey language adds credibility to the marketing and can be very, very effective, especially in our chaotic information environment. We've done a study on the use of the word microbiome. That's another really good example of Scienceploitation that you're seeing now on the internet. Gut health, microbiome, you throw that out there. So it's an exciting sciencey topic, and you can use that sort of pop culture name recognition in order to push a product.
How is this legal in either of our cultures in the legal system? Like on Goop, Gwyneth Paltrow promotes Anthony William, the medical medium who heals people using spirit communication. How does he and she get away promoting that without that being a lawsuit?
Well, I don't think it should be legal. And as you know, Gwyneth is actually has in California, she lost a truth in advertising lawsuit. I think it was the Jade eggs and some other products. And you slap on the wrist. I think it was like hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is like
$144,000.
Yeah. So you do see that kind of, and by the way, I like that. I think it's still important, even though it was a slap on the wrist, because now we have this precedent and we can talk about it and show people that this is misinformation. But I do think in this age of misinformation, we need to revisit the standards, exactly what you just talked about, Rob. Revisit the standards for truth in advertising, but also for entities like the Health Canada and the FDA. Because what often, I think two phenomena is happening. Often they're using this wiggle words like enhance your energy, revitalize. And these aren't going to trigger FDA, FTC action because they're not saying cure, treat, which are words that often will trigger that.
As with the map, align your chakras.
Yeah, those and another really good example now is immune boosting. So something else that we studied throughout the pandemic. We've done a couple of studies on this early in the pandemic. I don't know if you remember this. A lot of wellness people would use the phrase immune boosting. Right? They'll use that phrase. And then everyone said, you can't really boost your immune system, nor would you want to. That's anaphylaxis. That's an autoimmune disease. And by the way, your product does not do that. It's shifted. Now everyone talks about immune health, really trying to avoid these regulatory responses, because the FDA did come down on people that were saying, supplements, et cetera, that boost your immune system. There were a couple actions. So those are two things that are happening. I think, these wiggle words, the one thing's happening. The other one is the regulators just don't have the resources, and I think these people know that, right? So especially if they're small time actors, but they know it, and they're complaint driven. And unless there's a lot of noise, we've even seen it in the stem cell space. They just don't have the resources to go after all these people that are pushing products that can do real harm. So, that's one of the reasons why I think it is important to use pop culture moments that make a lot of noise to get the message out that this is bunk.
Okay, well, so let's talk about your CyCon presentation. So this year it's titled Misinformation and the Big Ideology Problem, and it's scheduled for Saturday at 9 a.m. Here's the conference's description of it. From wellness gurus to anti-vaxxers, there's always been a close connection between the embrace of bunk and personal identity. But the role of ideology as an engine of science-free misinformation seems to be intensifying, especially in the health sphere. For example, could you have guessed that the embrace of an anti-parasitic drug, ivermectin, would become an ideological flag on par with, flags? That QAnon supporters and yoga instructors would be part of the same posse. In this provocative presentation, Professor Caulfield will explore what the available evidence says and how and why ideology is used to spread health misinformation, and what we can, if anything, do about it. So what is this with the QAnon and yoga instructors connection there?
Yeah, which I'm obsessed with, by the way. I'm absolutely fascinated by this. As someone who's been following this for decades, it's, wellness started, it's been around for a very long time, decades and decades. But if you think about its rise during the 60s, when it was kind of a counterculture, left-wing phenomenon, right? Hippies. It really was not what one would ever think of as a right-wing phenomenon, right? But you had this sort of in the 60s, and then it evolved. You have wellness becoming more of a consumer product in the 80s and the 90s, and then you have the rise of the wellness gurus like Gwyneth et al. And now we see it as a right wing. So the wellness gurus now are increasingly right wing. We know that, for example, that this is where we see a lot of anti-vax rhetoric. We know that QAnon has actually spread through the wellness communities.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's become an alt-right phenomenon. And it is really incredible to me to see that shift. Now there are kind of overlaps, suspicion with meta narratives and suspicion of science and suspicion of big pharma. Those things have always been in common, but now they've the Venn diagrams have totally overlapped. And this again, there's a lot of empirical research going on in this space, which I'll talk about at the event. So this isn't going to just be speculation. It's a fascinating field. And I have seen ideology almost become the dominant theme, Rob, in a lot of the spreading of misinformation, whether you're talking about vaccines, whether you're talking about, ivermectin, whether you're talking about diets or supplements. I mean, think about who pushes supplements now. It often is coming from the right, whether you're talking about Alex Jones or whether you're talking about Joe Rogan. It's like it's this weird embrace by the right. It's a counter to what they think is the mainstream approach to doing anything. And research tells us, unfortunately, though, once misinformation becomes about, this is the bad news, it becomes about ideology, it becomes much more difficult to change people's minds.
So that's the embrace of bunk and personal identity. So it's like once you're in this club, you don't want to talk anything against what they believe, right? Otherwise you're out of it.
So, and I'll talk about this at the event, people often come because of the ideology and they stay despite the science-free lunacy, right? So, and there's been some interesting qualitative research, so we have to be careful not to overinterpret that have shown that with alternative medicine. Like some people go to alternative medicine, Rob, because they want it to work. They've heard it's efficacious. They have something that they haven't been able to get treatment, and so they want it to work. So then they become part of the community, and it becomes more about the philosophy, right? And we've seen that happen increasingly with wellness. I could go out on the street and I could ask. I might even try this at the event. You could ask people 2 or 3 questions, and depending on how they answer those things, I could tell you their position on 20 things. Right. And that's not just speculation. There's been studies to back that up. And you even see unbelievable correlations like this. A friend of mine, Frank Graves, has done really interesting research that has shown individuals who are pro-Russian, anti-Ukraine, much more likely to be anti-vax. Right? What a strange overlap, right? And I have, personal anecdotal examples of that, which I'll talk about probably at the event. My hate mailers, my anti-vax hate mailers became my pro-Russian hate mailers.
Wait, why did they bring up Russia and Ukrainian war with you? Why would they bring that up?
Because of that overlap. Right, because of that overlap, they'll say, and I think one of my first, right after the invasion, I think I was making fun of Putin on one of my social media feeds for losing his black belt. Did you hear he lost his Taekwondo black belt? That was just a joke. It was supposed to be a funny tweet, and immediately my anti-vaxxers hopped on the feed to say he's right. There's biolabs in Ukraine, and it's all about the next pandemic and selling the next vaccine. Recently, I posted on the feed this woman in a car. They're always in cars when they're ranting. I don't know what it is about that, but it was a TikTok. It was I hope they're driving and something comes to them. They push record. But it was almost like satire. It was chemtrails, GMOs. Go down the list. It was everything, right? Now, I think it's really, really important to highlight that this kind of ideological thing happens across the ideological spectrum, right? Like GMOs, as you know, is often the anti-GMO ranting often happens on the left, although I'm starting to see it migrate to the right. So maybe by the time the event happens, it will also be a right-wing thing. But you definitely see it happen across the ideological spectrum, right? And I think that's really important to emphasize. The thing is, it becomes about in-group signaling, tribalism. If I'm part of this community, I believe this cluster of things, and it's surprisingly strong phenomenon.
So is this what was, I'll say, alluded to in the description when you said that your talk may be provocative?
Yeah, I think so. I give a lot of public lectures, and I always ask the organizers, is it okay if I talk about ideology? Because, everyone has, that people say I'm not political, but everyone, everyone has ideological perspectives, right? And so I don't want to sound like I'm offending people on the right. I have family members that reside on the right of that ideological spectrum, and a healthy democracy demands that, right? I think that's good, right? Good, robust ideological discussions. But we have a lot of research now that tells us that this matters, that this sort of ideological framing really does matter.
And as you've pointed out, it's getting worse. What can we do about this? How do we stop the divide from increasing?
I'm always usually very optimistic, and I often talk about how debunking really does work, and there are all these great strategies that we can deploy that can make a real difference. I go on and on about this. And Rob, this is where I get a little bit more pessimistic. I think as this becomes more entrenched, look at the big lie, right, in the United States. It's just unbelievable.
There are people being elected to,
yeah.
all the primaries in the Republican Party who are still maintaining that the election was stolen. Yeah.
Which is, and I think it's really important, again, to emphasize, this is not a little conspiracy theory. It is completely ludicrous, right? And to have that many individuals in the United States believing, and the same thing starting to happen in Canada too, and where I used to be much more optimistic. I think our next premier here in Alberta is likely going to be a conspiracy theorist. The leader of the Conservative Party, who's just elected very recently, also sort of does conspiracy theory light, kind of that dog whistle to the Great Reset and the Great Replacement. Those kinds of conspiracy theories. So it's starting to have a real tangible impact in so many domains. And research does tell us it's more difficult to change people's minds when it becomes about ideology and sort of personal identity. When this is who you are, it becomes more difficult to change your mind.
Okay, so we have time for a few final questions. So do you know if you're going to be attending the entire conference or just the day that you're presenting?
I have another talk, and I think I'm there for most of it. Okay. So I'm looking forward to, these are such fun events. The community is amazing. So I love it. When you do public lectures, and I gave a talk, I won't say where I swear a third of the audience was anti-vaxxers, and they were telling me to F off. Yeah.
Oh, come on, where was that?
I don't want to say.
They won't watch this.
I don't want to say. And so I know that's not going to be the case in Vegas. It is such a great, fun, smart community, and the hallway conversations are so great. So I want to be there for as much of it as I can.
Very cool. Okay, so I think we can wrap it up there. Thanks for your time again today, and I hope to meet you in real life in Vegas in just a little over a month.
Well, thanks very much, Rob. I'm really looking forward to it.